Hey, greetings, great agent Steve Schleter with Never Ending Referrals. And we're diving into uh, video number 3 of Winterize Your Business for Success. And so in our last segment, we talked about the care call and the opportunity to validate or educate based upon their response to the key question, which was, what are you hearing about the real estate market? And, of course, we know one of those areas where there's a lot of confusion is the future of interest rates. Where are interest rates likely to go? And we know, of course, it's got a lockup on a lot of listings. People are reluctant to maybe get out of their home because they're locked into a 3% mortgage, maybe sub 3% mortgage. And yet there are going to be people that have to move. And there are certainly opportunities for people to buy in this market. And how do we get some clarity around the direction of interest rates that helps people move forward? Because if they don't know what's going to happen, there's a tendency to do nothing and to sit and wait. And so let's just say in the care call conversation that somebody has an interest in do something. They originally, when they were talking about interest rates, they were thinking that they were going to come down in 2024 because it was election year. And they've come in for a consultation, or I'm sitting down at their kitchen table and I've got to educate them on interest rates because we believe they're a little bit misguided on where they're going to be going, believing that they're going to come down because of an election year. Now, I don't believe that. I believe there are a lot of people that don't believe that. Whatever your belief is about interest rates, you have to find certainty and a way to back it up so that you can have other people have certainty to make good decisions. Your response can't be when they say, what's going to happen with interest rates? You can't be, I don't know. Your guess good as mine. That's not going to help them. That just helps people do nothing. And so we're going to talk about a conversation that'll give people certainty about interest rates. And when we go back, in fact, I'm going to share my screen. We go back to some of the conversations that we talked about. We talked about being the trusted advisor and how important, we talked about in our first video, it was to have those messages that match the market. And, one is going to be around interest rates. And it might even be one that you can still get an interest rate in the 5s. Now, that would include concessions, right? And so you can build a couple of the opportunities of the market into a message. And of course, our core MOFR, we said, was to schedule a no obligation strategy session if you've got any plans to do anything in real estate the next 12 to 24 months. Going back to the trust triangle from our first video, so now as we sit down in a consultation, they've experienced the empathy in the care call. They're going to feel it in our meeting when we sit down at their kitchen table. And now we're going to bring some logic to help them understand, that left point of the trust triangle, that we really understand the market, that our reasoning and judgment are sound. So they're going to listen to us and take our guidance versus the confusion. So let's go to this thing on interest rates. Now, back in the day, we'd talk about news clippings, right? You clip the newspaper. Today, you got to be web clippings, and you're looking for the articles that may validate your conversations. So it's just not you. So let's talk interest rates. So right here, when the Fed met just recently, so you'll see this is dated September 20th, Wall Street closes lower after Fed holds rate steady, warns of higher for longer. Same day, here's another article. Fed pauses rate hikes for second time this year, but hints at another increase. And in that same article, it goes on to say, but policymakers also left the door open for additional increases before the end of the year and indicated that rates are likely to remain at peak levels longer than previously expected. Towards the bottom, we're prepared to raise rates further if appropriate. And here's the next key part. And we intend to hold policy at a restrictive level until we're confident that inflation is moving down sustainably toward our objective. And so you see the bottom, Fed skips an interest rate hike, but the high mortgage rates could be here to stay. In the same article, they talked about core inflation being higher than projected. In the same article, they talked about unemployment being lower than they anticipated. Now, what that means is they're not taking steam out of the economy. People are still working. When they're working, they're spending money. And the biggest impact on the economy is the consumer spending money. And so all this points to pressures on inflation, which points to pressures on interest rates. So I could use this to kind of show, so here's some of the things we're watching, and what we see in the media that supports some of what I'd like to share with you. Can I educate you what we see as the trends in mortgage rates and what's likely to happen? And I can have this conversation using these 4 slides right here. In fact, in my market centers, we've developed, our agents have a consulting guide that combines some of these resources to have the conversation with the consumer, and we put it together into a 10-page guide. But let's take this example. I'm going to start with the first slide. So we have a slide on the history of mortgage rates, unemployment, what's happening with unemployment annually, job openings, and what is happening with inflation. And let's take it one slide at a time. So I might say, can I walk you through kind of the journey that we've been on the last, 50 years or so with interest rates and what we see trending going forward? And I would call their attention to this blue line, this dotted line here. And I would say, so in recent history, going back to 1990, 30 years, 33 years, we've averaged right at 6% mortgage rate. Now, you notice the only time we really dipped below 6% was during a recession after the dot-com bubble busted in the early 2000s to stimulate the economy. And then as we were coming, into the Great Recession, which really bottomed in 2012, we saw a dramatic drop in interest rates to stimulate the economy and get the economy going again. And what happened after that is they didn't come back up. And what we had was abnormally low interest rates for like 15 years. And people asked the question recently, why didn't rates go back up after the Great Recession? And the answer is a simple one. Inflation was in check. And the inflation was in check for this reason. The consumer was quieter. The baby boomer was coming out of their peak spending years. They were no longer in that period. Then, of course, the millennial generation, which is a large generation, hadn't entered its peak spending and consumption years. Now they're actually entering that now, and that's part of the pressure. And there was actually a lag in birth rates, in that middle between the baby boomer and the millennial, that meant we had a quieter consumer. The gross, consumer price index was not out of control. The consumer wasn't in crazy spending. Now, this is getting more technical than you would get with the consumer, and yet I would have you understand this. And so what I might just say with the consumer is, so as you can see, it was really that demographics were such that the baby boomer was leaving their peak spending years, the millennial had not yet entered their peak spending years, and as a result, there wasn't a lot of pressure on inflation. Well, the millennials are now becoming a powerful consumer base. And that, with energy prices, things like this, is really putting pressure on our economy, on an inflation. And if we go back in history and look at, well, when was another time like this, when we had high inflation, we had a busy, active consumer base? It was in the 70s and 80s. And, we had a demographic wave with the baby boomers coming into peak spending. We had inflation getting really wrangled. We had high energy cost during some of these years. And as a result, let me get back to that. As a result, we saw inflation get, sticky, and interest rates had to go up. Now, I want you to go back to 73. And I want you to imagine, as when you look at that gold line, it's 7.81 is the 53-year history or 50-year history of interest rates. And if we go back to 1973, as they started to move above 8%, imagine being a home buyer in 73 saying, I'm going to wait till interest rates get back below 8% before I buy a home. And you would have waited 20 years to 1993. And by the way, the annual appreciation rate during that period on a residential home nationally was 4% a year. And so think about all the appreciation somebody would have missed out on, the wealth building opportunity, if they'd sat on the sideline. Or if they sat on the sideline too long and interest rates went up to 12, 13, 15, 16% and stayed highly elevated back into the gosh, into the mid 80s, a lot of missed opportunity. My first mortgage personally, must have been 1985, was 13.5%. So that's the history of mortgage rates. And so really understanding right now at 7.5-ish, we're just about 1.5% across above the long-term, the short-term or interim term normal, and we're actually at the long-term normal. And yet doesn't make it comfortable. And what we really have to look at is affordability. And so the question is, what direction are interest rates likely to go in? And well, one of the things we know that drives inflation, which drives interest rates, is, are people working? And you'll see that right now we have record unemployment, 3.6%. And as you look over a 33-year history here, the closest we had was 3.7 in 2019. And so that in mind, and by the way, is that wildly going to swing in the near future? And our guess is not, well, it's not a guess. Our educated, assessment is it's not, because of this. And right now in the United States, there are 9.58 million job openings, and there are 5.95 million people looking for work. Now, I've got a question for you. Do you see help wanted signs everywhere? Yeah. How about the fast food places near your home? Have you seen the wage offerings go up over the last 3 years? Yeah, I know the Chick-fil-A by my house, used to be $12 an hour, then it was 14, then it was 16, and now it's 17 or 18 an hour, plus all this big list of benefits that are being offered because they're competing for the worker, for the not enough workers that are out there. And so that means wage growth, which means more money into the economy, which means more pressure on inflation. And it goes back to the Fed's comments on probably higher for longer. And although inflation has come down, the target rate's 2.2%, and the core is still at 4.7% core inflation. And when you include energy and food, it's 3.2%. So based on how they're measuring it, somewhere between 3 and 5% is where inflation's at today. And based upon that, can you see how interest rates are likely to stay elevated? So understanding that that's where we are today on interest rates, and that the federal government is more scared of inflation than they are what your mortgage rate is today, it could go up still. And if we're wrong, it could go down, and that would be okay because we could refinance. But my question to you is, if we could find a home that met your needs, that you could afford monthly, are you ready to be a buyer in today's market today and take advantage of the opportunities today? And this is where I can go back and I can tie in some of the other conversations that we're going to have in the future videos, like the choices that we have today, or even if your market's still a tight inventory market, is it a seasonal trend where we're likely to have more choices for a window of time and get into the market right now? In my markets, we've gone from sub 1 month supply of inventory to 3.9 to 4.2 month supply in many of our markets. And our list to sales price ratios state that there's room for negotiation. So one of my messages out to the marketplace might be, did you know that you could still get a mortgage for 5.78% today, a 30-year fixed rate? Call me for the details. There are unique opportunities in this market that you don't want to miss. Call me to schedule a no obligation strategy session. That's going to be my offer. And now how are we going to do that? We're going to do an FHA loan with a 6% seller contribution or builder contribution and buy the rate down 1.5%. And that, depending on where rates are at the moment, maybe that gets us in the 5s or it gets us in the low 6s. You can build the conversation, the message to match the market that creates curiosity to allow you to get to more kitchen tables. So next video, we're going to go into the conversation or the opportunity of the market that is just that. It's the opportunity for concessions. It's the opportunity for choice, how we communicate that in our message, how we counsel on it at our kitchen tables. So I trust this was helpful. And by the way, I do want to share one thing with you as we wrap up this little video. If you're finding these resources helpful and you're ready to dominate your database, I want you to invite you to explore our Never Ending Referrals group coaching program that Tammy Youngst and I host. It's 8 foundational lessons to take you through being the true master of your database, building the muscle around getting a 10% return on the number of contacts you have in your database. So if I've got 300, that should be 30 transactions minimum a year. And if that's not happening right now, well, join us in Never Ending Referrals. And you can go to neverendingreferrals.com. Being part of our community is just $39 a month. And Tammy and I are live 3 Mondays a month at noon Central Time. And again, go to neverendingreferrals.com. You can click to register. You can get more details. We'd love to have you be a part of our program. Again, that's neverendingreferrals.com. So next video, we're going to talk about concessions, choices, opportunities, and ultimately it's going to be part of a combination of how do we guide people to understanding how to move forward today. So trust this is helpful. We'll see you on the next video.